Tonight we're continuing in the Krishna book, in the chapter entitled Prayers by the Personified Vedas. And we began this chapter yesterday morning, and now we're continuing. So the question posed here is, how is it possible that the conditioned living entities, us, with our material mind, senses, and intelligence, understand the transcendental subject matter of Krishna and the Absolute Truth, or Brahman? Such subjects can only be approached by thinking with the material mind and by vibrating material words. But Brahman and the Absolute Truth have no material qualities. And our power of speaking doesn't go beyond the material qualities. So how can Brahman or the Absolute Truth be described by our words? And Maharaj Parikshit is asking Sukadeva Goswami, I don't see how it's possible to understand the transcendence from such expressions of material sound. So Maharaj Parikshit's purpose in asking this question from Sukadeva Goswami is whether the Vedas actually describe the ultimate truth as either impersonal or as personal. Because understanding the Absolute Truth progresses in three features: the impersonal Brahman, the localized Paramatma, and in everyone's heart, and at last the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, the origin of everything. But the Vedas mainly deal with the three modes of material nature: Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistraigunya Bhavarjana, Nirdvandva Nirmukta Bhajantimam Dhritavata. So this is explained in the second chapter, where it says, Krishna asks Arjuna to rise above the influence of the modes of material nature, because he says the three Vedas, meaning Rig, Sama, Yajur Veda, they deal only with the modes of material nature, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistraigunya Bhavarjana. The Vedas deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of material nature, O Arjuna. So Nistraigunya Bhavarjana, rise above these three modes. Nirdvandva Nitya Sattvasto. Be free from all dualities and from anxieties for gain and safety. Nir Yoga Shema Atmavan, and be established in the self. So everyone in the material world is struggling with the three modes of material nature, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. So how is it possible that such people under such influence can understand the transcendental subject of the Vedas? Okay, so this is a very valid question. And Sukadeva Goswami replies that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has created the mind, the senses, and the living force of the living entity for the purpose of sense gratification and transmigration of one kind of body to another, as well as for the purpose of allowing liberation from the material conditions. In other words, we originally revolted against Krishna in the spiritual world, and Krishna puts us in the material world, where we're given a chance to either stay in the material world and suffer infinitely, or to become liberated and reattain our original position in the spiritual world. In other words, one can utilize the senses, mind, and living force for either sense gratification and transmigration from one body to another in the material world, or for the matter of liberation. So the Vedic knowledge and Vedic wisdom is given or delivered by Krishna to give the conditioned souls a chance for either sense gratification under regulative principles And thereby, they're able to make gradual promotion to higher conditions of life, higher consciousness. And if their consciousness is purified through the regulation of the Vedas, one comes to the original position and goes back home, back to Godhead. Under no circumstances does Krishna recommend unrestricted sense gratification, as is going on today, because that means people will be more and more condemned to go to lower and lower species of life and never become free of the material entanglement. So, regulation is fundamental for following the Vedas. This is explained also in many places in the Bhagavad Gita. We'll just take one place where it says, Nayam lokosti ayagyasya kuto anya kuru satama. O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? So, here Krishna says that one must perform jagya, or sacrifices, and that requires regulated behavior, according to the rules and regulations of the Vedas. So we have 4 basic regulations. No meat eating, fish or eggs. No gambling or philosophical speculation. No illicit sex. And no intoxication, including coffee and tea. So those are what you call the yamas, forbidden things, or outlawed things. And then the niyamas are regulated things that are permitted. Regulated hearing and chanting, like we're hearing right now, Bhagavad Gita. This should be done every day, optimally twice a day, or at least once a day. Hearing and discussing and learning the subject. The subject is not how to make more money on the stock market. It's how to liberate yourself from the entanglement of material life, and once liberated, engage in the devotional service of the Lord to develop love for Krishna. And that love for Krishna makes you immune to the influence of the modes of material nature and to the illusory allure to material life, and basically liberated now, not liberated later on, liberated now. And at the moment of death, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan tijat ante kalevaram tam tami vait konteya sadatad bhava bhavita. You remember Krishna at the moment of death, and your life is the cumulative effect of your life is to have developed love for Krishna, then you go back to God. So it's a very good process, scientific process. One must be liberated now first to be able to engage in the devotional service of life. Most people mistake liberation as meaning, at the end of life you go to Swarga. Swarga is not liberation. You're still in the material world. You're still subject to birth and death and rebirth and so forth. However, real liberation is becoming liberated from false concepts, illusory concepts. Just like I met one boy and I said, what do you want to do in life? He said, I want to work in Microsoft. Oh, I said, really? He said, what are you doing to get a job there? I said, what? How can you get a job in Microsoft? Most of the engineers, they all smoke marijuana. I said, how do you know that? So I heard. I said, you think that's the way they got a job there? He said, yeah, I think that. So, do you think you'll ever get a job in Microsoft? Huh? But that's what he has in the mind. That's what he's convinced that that's the way, because he heard this rumor that most of the people in Microsoft smoke marijuana. I told him, even if that's true, it's not true, but even if it's true, there's no guarantee that you would get a job in Microsoft by smoking marijuana. You see how crazy people are? They get these crazy ideas. Just like, in one temple we had to ask one pujari to leave because he was a thief. So his friend, which was a pujari, he came to the temple president and said, Prabhu, you should let him back. She said, why? He said, it's always good to have some mafia guys in the temple. Now, how can he, what is his reasoning? Well, the reasoning is if you have a mafia guy in the temple, then he'll protect you from the other mafia guys. Now, does that make sense? The guy's a pujari, right? Now he's admitting the guy's a mafia guy, right? He's a thief. And he's an embezzler. Now, why should we not throw him out? Well, his reason is it's good to have one mafia guy in the temple. Have you ever heard anything as silly as this? And this is the truth. It happened last week. Not here, but somewhere else. Now, you see, one has to be liberated from these false concepts. A lot of people have false concepts. Just like I knew one devotee here. He was having trouble with his wife. I said, what's the trouble? The wife said, he's beating me. And I asked her, why are you beating her? Oh, it's necessary. I said, what for? So, no, she doesn't want to serve my parents. I'm going to beat her until she accepts to serve my parents. I said, listen, she didn't marry your parents. She married you. She didn't marry you to become a servant, a menial servant of your parents. She married you to be your partner in Krishna consciousness. She said, no, she has to serve my parents. Otherwise, I beat her. I said, look, you already got one divorce. Now you're working on your second divorce if you keep up this crazy idea. You see? His idea of getting married was she has to serve my parents because they're getting old and I have to work and she'll serve my parents. Is that why she got married? Why didn't he explain that to her before they got married? You see? Don't think that, just the mafia story is the only story of illusion. We can go through millions of stories of illusion. That's why you have millions and millions of people in the material world, and they're all entangled. And none of them are going back to Godhead. They're going to take repeated birth and death because of these false ideas in the mind. So real liberation is not you sprout wings and you fly up to Swarga and you dance with the pretty girls there and drink wine. No, that's not liberation. That's more contamination, actually, but on a higher level. It's like being first-class prisoner, second-class prisoner, third. We're third and fourth-class prisoners right here, right? But we want to become first-class prisoners so we can drink wine and have conjugal visits, right? So we go to the Swarga Loka. But that's still prisoner. And we'll remain prisoner as long as we have these screwed up false concepts in the mind. By hearing Bhagavad Gita on a regular basis, one can purify these screwed up false concepts. Otherwise, it's impossible. Because every day, our mind is getting more screwed up. We listen to the news, we read a book, just like I met one boy at our free restaurant, and I said to him, do you believe in God? He said, nope. I said, really? I said, how come? He said, well, when I was a young boy, I used to believe in God. But when I went to college, I read a book by a PhD, and he says we all come from chimpanzees. That's when I stopped believing in God. I said, have you ever seen any chimpanzee give birth to a human being? He said, nope. I said, now how can you believe it? Oh, no, the guy's a PhD. I said, PhD? I said, I met a guy who was a real estate agent. His name was Rick Evans, PhD. So I said, hey, Rick, I said, I never met a real estate agent that's a PhD. He started laughing when I said that. He said, oh no, PhDs means I'm a post-hole digger. I said, a what? He said, a post-hole digger. I said, what's that? He said, you know those guys, they make fences? You got to dig a hole in the ground first. You have this special instrument you buy at Home Depot to get the dirt out of the ground. That's what I do on the side. I said, okay, Rick, I understand. I said, you're a very witty guy, Rick. I never met anybody as funny as you. You see, he's making fun, because any PhD you meet today, I mean, majority of them, they all say we all come from monkeys. Now, what kind of PhD is that? Do you believe we come from monkeys? Do you have a monkey in your family? I know I don't have a monkey in my family, right? So you see, these guys are not any better than a post-hole digger. To believe such a preposterous, nonsense thing, or it all starts from a big bang. Okay, you make a big bang in your kitchen. Let's see what's produced from it. You just burn your house down, you idiot. There's no such thing as, nothing is produced from a big bang except devastation. You see? Oh, no, it's, well, why after the Big Bang, the law of gravity took over and it created living beings. Law of gravity. Law of gravity took over and we created living beings. That is nonsense. You can't prove that. Show me something that the law of gravity created. You see, people just say anything. You know, the best one is Stephen Hawking. Well, we have to all go to Mars because we're ruining the environment on the Earth. Now, can we learn anything from an idiot like that? Right? He's a paraplegic. He's suffering from severe karma for being sinful in his past life. And he's telling us all to go to Mars or the moon because we ruined the environment on the Earth. Well, you can go first, Stephen. We'll follow you after you send us a postcard from the moon. Look, these people are crazy. But because they have a PhD, see that man said, well, I read this book by a PhD, he said, we all come from chimpanzees, so I stopped believing in God. You see how preposterous this is? Why? He has a PhD. What, he knows something about creation? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know enough to clean his butt. Okay, so here it says, Obeshe Kuru Dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? And Srila Prabhupada, our Guru Dev, writes, whatever form of material existence one is invariably ignorant of his real situation. Does anyone disagree with this statement? No. We're all ignorant. We don't know where we came from. We're not quite sure where we are, and we don't know where we're going. In other words, existence in the material world is due to the multiple reactions of our sinful lives. Notice it says multiple reactions, because we've had many previous lives, and not all the reactions are fructified. We can have reactions waiting to fructify from many lifetimes in the past. Ignorance is the cause of sinful life. Well, hallelujah, that's the truth. Everyone who goes to Bellevue Bungra Bar with DJ Kazan, they are in deep ignorance. Deep, deep ignorance. You know anybody who does it? Huh? You know somebody who goes to DJ Kazan's Bungra in the bar? Yes? They have a good time? So, ignorance is the cause of sinful life. Yeah, and you go to the bar, you're trying to have sex with the girls, drinking liquor, maybe you gamble, maybe you eat some meat to have strength to have more sex, right? And then you have to drink the liquor to digest the rotten piece of putrefying flesh in the intestines. So it increases the heat in your stomach to be able to digest a dead body in your body. Does that make sense? Eating dead bodies to get health? That's ridiculous. Of course, ignorance is the cause of sinful life, and sinful life is the cause of one's dragging on in material existence. Now we know why people are suffering, and they don't know why. Because of multiple reactions to our sinful life. The human form of life is the only loophole by which one may get out of this entanglement. So there was one big atheist, W.C. Fields. Have you ever heard of W.C. Fields? Yeah. And he was famous in the 1930s and 40s. He was a funny guy. He was very funny. He was a big fat guy. He used to talk like, well, now I think I'm going to get a nice girl. You know, he was a funny guy. He was very funny. You know, he was a comedian, right? He was very famous. Well, he was once asked, said, Mr. Fields, you believe in God? I don't believe in God, but I read the Bible. He said, really? What do you read? I'm looking for a loophole. You say, you know what a loophole means? some way he can finagle his way out of death, right? He said, that's why I'm reading the Bible, to find a loophole. That's what lawyers do. Lawyers are liars. They read the law to find a loophole in it, so they can finagle their guilty client out of jail, right? The human form of life is the only loophole by which one can get out of this entanglement. Yeah, you can't become self-realized in the body of a dog, a cat, a cockroach, a rat, an elephant, a bird, a snake. But in the human form, if it's civilized, it's possible. The Vedas therefore give us a chance for escape by pointing out the paths of religion, economic comfort, regulated sense gratification, and at last, the means to get out of the miserable condition entirely. So, regulation is the key word here. Regulating eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Now, I was once hearing a lecture by an imam in a mosque, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to let you know that nature is a Muslim. That perked up everyone's ears, they had never heard that. He said, yes, because nature is perfectly following Allah. Now, the man was right. Like dogs, they only have sex once a year. They have a season when they get hot, either once or twice. It's regulated. As soon as the season's over, they stop. They're not interested. Animals, most animals, I saw on the Discovery Channel a lion mating. It took like 30 seconds. He waited till the she lion was ready, and you can tell when the she lion's ready. There's physical sign. And she's just sitting there, and he comes up behind her, poof, it's finished. 30 seconds. And that's it. She gets pregnant because he's very powerful. And the whole thing is over. So, yeah, it's right. Nature is a Muslim. They're completely surrendered to Allah. They only do things in a regulated way in nature. It's only the human beings that are irregulated, you see. Why? Because we have some free will. Limited free will, but still it's free. We can either choose to follow Krishna or refuse to follow Krishna. So we're not Muslims. We're not Sanatan Dharmis. We're nothing as long as we're irregulated. But if we become regulated, then we become on the path, not that we are, but on the path to become a devotee. One must be free of all these false ideas in the mind. Right? Then we're liberated you have to be liberated to engage in Krishna's service, because you have to come to the same level as Krishna. No influence of the modes of material nature in order to render real service. So none of us are actually rendering real service right now. We're just trying, because sometimes we're influenced by the modes and sometimes we're not. Modes meaning sattva, rajas, and tamas. So, by becoming completely regulated and chanting our rounds and regularly hearing Bhagavad Gita, then we come to the level of sattva guna, and if we continue, then we come to visuddha sattva, transcendental goodness. That's when we're liberated. That's when our service has the most positive effect. The most positive effect, we're no longer influenced by negative thoughts and desires. Our karma has been put on hold, so there's no obstacle to our service. The Vedas, therefore, give us a chance for escape by pointing out the paths of religion, economic comfort, regulated sense gratification, and at last the means to get out of the miserable condition entirely. The path of religion, or the different kinds of sacrifice recommended above, automatically solves our economic problems. By performance of yajna, we can have enough food, enough milk, etc., even if there is a so-called increase of population, which is another myth. Oh, there's too much population, the earth's going to be ruined. You could have 100 times more population and the earth could support it. But the problem is, if you have Varna Shankara, unwanted children who are not trained to live piously, then you could reduce the population 10 times and it still would be overpopulated. By performance of yajna or sacrifice, we can have enough food, enough milk, etc., even if there is a so-called increase of population. When the body is fully supplied, naturally, the next stage is regulated sense gratification. Next stage is to satisfy the senses. The Vedas prescribe, therefore, sacred marriage for regulated sense gratification. Thereby, one is gradually elevated to the platform of release from material bondage, and the highest perfection of liberated life is to associate with the Supreme Lord. So, the reason we're here, the reason we became attracted to the material world, even though we were in the spiritual world, is because of sense gratification. And the epitome of sense gratification is sex. We didn't come to drink alcohol. We didn't come to eat meat. We didn't come to gamble. Those things follow. We came for sense gratification. And if you read the Bible, it's the same story as there, the story of Adam and Eve. The devil convinces Eve to eat from the one tree that God forbade Adam and Eve to eat from. Adam and Eve were living in paradise, right? The Garden of Eden. In other words, they had everything supplied to them. They didn't have to work. There was no pregnancy. They were living an ideal life, right? Because they didn't have to reproduce because they were eternal. Right? They had everything they wanted. They had all these opulent trees. They could pick the fruit from any tree and eat it, and it was all luscious fruit. So they weren't eating animals. The animals were there too. They weren't eating them, according to the Bible. They were just eating the fruits of the tree. Because by the fruit of the tree, you don't kill the tree. And you don't kill the fruit. The fruit is the seed. You spit the seed out, it grows another tree. So there was complete opulence. God just forbade them to eat from one tree, the tree of knowledge and sin. And they were following it. But the devil was able to convince Eve that God was hiding something from her and Adam. And Eve said, what is he hiding? Why would he do that? He's given us everything. He said, no, because the fruit of knowledge and evil is a greater pleasure than any other fruit in this garden. And he's hiding it from you. You see? It's just like if I tell you, you can get more money if you invest in these penny stocks. They only cost a penny. But if they go up 10 cents, you made 10 times the... But see, those penny stocks are called junk stocks. Right? But by increasing your greed factor, right? You only invest $1,000, it'll become $10,000 if it goes up 10 ticks. So, and he says it's easy, and even if it doesn't go up right away, it's sure to go up in the future. So he inspires you to invest in junk stocks, on which he's making a bigger commission than if you buy normal stocks, right? So that greed factor entices you to close off your rational sense and jump into the dark. You see, leap into the dark. So the same thing was happening. The devil is promising Eve that God is hiding a greater type of sense gratification by forbidding her to eat from this fruit. And all she has to do is eat it, and then she'll see this much greater sense gratification. So the whole idea is the enticement of increased sense gratification. Just like, let's say a man has been married 25 years, and a woman has been married 25 years, and their children are raised, and life is getting a little boring for them, right? They know each other too well. So then the man, as is some businessman, he gets a new secretary. She's a very pretty girl, with nice earrings, high heels, nylon stockings, makeup on. She speaks real sweetly, right? Pretty soon he gets attached to her because he feels excitement with her that he doesn't feel with his wife. Right? What's the whole point? He's feeling, well, I'm 50 now, but I feel like I'm 25. But my wife, she looks like she's getting old. She's not really interested so much like we were before. But here's this young girl, I could get 25 years of sense gratification out of her. By the time I'm 75, she'll be 50, and I can have more fun. So he divorces his wife and he runs off with the girl and then divorces his wife. Why? Sense gratification. He commits a sinful activity. So the same thing happened to Eve. He promised her that she would find greater sense gratification by eating the fruit of this tree. She eats it, and immediately she realizes she made a big mistake. And now, they were walking around naked. Now she's hiding herself. She feels shame. Right? So, but misery likes company. So now, she alone has violated God's word, and she's going to have to leave the Garden of Eden. But she purposely convinces her husband to also eat from that tree, because misery likes company. You see how things work, right? So, she convinces him. She uses all her feminine guile, just like Satan, the devil, used all his guile to convince Eve. She does the same thing to her husband. He eats. Then he also has violated God's instruction. Now he feels shame. He's hiding his nudity. And then God comes and says, "What have you done?" He says, "What have you done? I asked you not to eat of this one tree. Why did you do it?" And they say, "Oh, we don't know, So he's forced to send them out. He said, from now on, he looks at Adam, "You will toil with sweat and hunger and thirst and fatigue just to make a living." And he looks at Eve and says, "And now you will have children and you will suffer terribly." Right? And then they're both pushed out of the Garden of Eden into the material world where they have to struggle all the time. And they're subject to death, where they were not subject to death in the garden. Well, this is an allegorical story. Did it actually happen exactly like that? We don't know for sure. But the principle that's demonstrated is true. It's true. The reason why we fell down from the spiritual world to the material world is because we became attracted to an illusory concept of greater sense gratification, independent of God. There's no independence of God. There's no greater sense gratification. But we believed it. And that's called a false concept, a mirage, something that doesn't have any reality, but we believe it's true. And until we can clear away all these false concepts from the brain, we are conditioned in this world, and we will not be able to really engage in the service of Krishna. It'll be interrupted or stopped at some point because of these false concepts. And the only way to get rid of the false concept is to listen regularly to Bhagavad Gita, spoken honestly. So, by performance of yajna or sacrifice, we can have enough food, enough milk, etc., even if there is a so-called increase of population. When the body is fully supplied, naturally the next stage is to satisfy the senses. The Vedas prescribe, therefore, sacred marriage for regulated sense gratification. Thereby, one is gradually elevated to the platform of release from material bondage, and the highest perfection of liberated life is to associate with the Supreme Lord. Perfection, so now, when we become liberated from these false concepts, one can become a pujari and be associated directly with the Lord. Or one can chant the name of Krishna and distribute books, or cook for Krishna, or clean the temple. All this is associated directly with the Supreme Lord, this whole process of devotional service. Perfection is achieved by performance of yajna, sacrifice, as described above. Now, if a person is not inclined to perform yajna according to the Vedas, how can he expect a happy life even in this body, and what to speak of another body or another planet? There are different grades of material comforts in different heavenly planets, and in all cases, there is immense happiness for persons engaged in different kinds of yajna. But the highest kind of happiness that a man can achieve is to be promoted to the spiritual planets by practice of Krishna consciousness. A life of Krishna consciousness is therefore the solution to all the problems of material existence. Now, you don't think people are looking for a solution to all the problems of material existence? But they're not interested in finding it in Krishna consciousness. They want to find it through Obamacare They want to find it through raising the minimum wage. They want to find it through being promoted in Microsoft or something like that. They don't want to find it through following regulative principles of spiritual life. See? And therefore, what happens? They never find it. They never find it because they're looking in the wrong place. You can never find what you're looking for in the wrong place. Okay. So, then, are there any questions on this before we go any further? You see, this chapter on the prayers of the personified Vedas is extremely powerful philosophical knowledge. We just read a few lines and then we go into a whole discussion because it's chock full of concentrated knowledge. These are like sutras, and this is 100 pages of sutras. It's extremely. We're going to discuss the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness through this. Are there any questions? Okay, so we'll read one more paragraph. Yeah. Yeah.
Adam and Eve was created by the God.
Who?
Adam and Eve.
What?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Yeah.
Created
Okay.
by God for the means that's what Christians feel. That's what they believe that whole this world was created by.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Adam and Eve. Yes.
Yeah.
Then
that level also
he also created Satan. Satan was an angel. He lived in the spiritual world. But he revolted against God, and out of spite, he wanted to destroy human race, take them away from God. That was his way of getting back. And he was forced to leave heaven also. So Adam and Eve were born in the material world, not in the spiritual world.
Oh, not in
Yeah. But there was this Garden of Eden where they could live, and they could live forever. You know, it was like the spiritual world. But they were the first human beings. This is according to Christianity. It's not necessarily Vedas, right? So, but Satan was in the material world, right? So he entered into the Garden of Eden to purposely make Adam and Eve revolt against God also, to cause pain to God.
pain.
You see. They were not angels, but they were human beings, but they were living in paradise. So he did this out of spite, out of envy and spite. And the way he did it was to convince Eve that there was a greater type of sense gratification than what God had revealed to them. He was hiding it. And that's why he forbade them to eat the fruit of this one tree. But that tree, the fruit of that tree was disobedience to God and sin. Right? Obviously God didn't want it, but he couldn't force them. He couldn't, let's say, well, why didn't he create all the trees the same? Why did he put that one tree? Well, because human beings have free choice. Either they want to follow Krishna or they don't. Either way, there are consequences, right? So it's an allegorical story. It's not necessarily exactly true, but the principles in it are true. The principles in it are true. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Are there any references to these stories in the Vedas?
Which stories?
Like Adam and how do
Any reference in the Bible or in the Vedas?
in the Vedas?
Yeah, well, no, in the Vedas you have a much more complete story. Much more complete story of material creation. It's in the 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Very, very complete explanation. And we can discuss that at one point. Right. We have the entire set of Srimad Bhagavatam. You can, if you read the 3rd canto, it gives you a very scientific, detailed explanation of how the material world was created, from going from subtle energy called the pradhana to the more active state of material energy called mahat tattva. And then from the mahat tattva, how Krishna gave Brahma the knowledge to create the different species of life. And not that they're created, but the bodies are created. Just like, GM, General Motors, creates different types of bodies of cars, right? But then an individual like you or me buys one of those cars and sits in it and starts driving it. So all the bodies were created by Brahma. The souls were injected into the material world by Krishna through the agency of Shiva Linga and Durga Mata's womb. And this is all explained in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in very great detail, if you're interested. And then Brahma creates Swayambhuva Manu and Satarupa. Brahma is the first created being, but then the first Prajapati is Swayambhuva Manu and his wife Satarupa. And from them, many different species of life are produced. The bodies are there, but then, they procreate. They begin the process of procreation. Brahma is the supreme Prajapati, and then Swayambhuva Manu is the first Manu and chief Prajapati, and Satarupa is his wife. So it explains all about them. So if you're interested. The Bible is very simplistic. Not very, especially the Old Testament. It's very, very simplistic. But the kernel of truth is there in that allegory of Adam and Eve. Why we fell down, why we were attracted, how we got tricked by the glittering allure of material nature and the promise of sense gratification and so forth. And how to do that we have to violate God's instructions. And then that gets us entangled in the process of karma. And unless we get remediated by prolonged suffering, and finally we say, I give up, I want to know why this is happening to me. Then Krishna has given the Vedas for those fortunate souls who don't want to suffer anymore. They want to understand, why is this happening? I'm working to be happy, and suffering is coming. It doesn't make sense. I'm not working to suffer. I'm working to be happy, but suffering is coming. And therefore, there's some exterior sources that are controlling me. Now I want to find out what it is. What is my real position here? See? Now, that's the beginning of spiritual life. When a person asks that question, say, I'm working to be happy, but I'm suffering also. So why is this? In spite of all the plans I have, in spite of all the protective shields that I, use, still the suffering is creeping in and interrupting my happiness. Why is this happening? I want to know. There are external forces that I don't understand that are, forcing me. And I'm being forced also to be born. I'm being forced to get old. I'm being forced to get sick. And I'm being forced to die. I'm not choosing to do these things. So this is my real problem in life. It's not economic, military, social, health, or whatever. It's birth, old age, disease, and death. And I don't have any knowledge why it's happening, and I don't have any knowledge how to avoid this. And when I die, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Therefore, I'm going to ask not Darwin, not Marx, not Freud, not Hawkins, not this one, or Dawkins, whatever. I'm going to ask somebody who actually knows, Krishna. Krishna answers every one of these questions in Bhagavad Gita. But no one's interested in Bhagavad Gita. They're interested in Microsoft certification, they're interested in sexology books and things like that. They're not interested in understanding why we suffer in life and how to get free of it. They're reading books to increase the suffering, to increase the illusion. We all come from monkeys. There's no God. Right? So that they increase the suffering by increasing the false concepts in the mind. You smoke marijuana, you get a job in Microsoft. You become CEO of Microsoft. More marijuana you smoke. Does that make sense? Okay, so we'll stop right here. If there are no more questions, we'll continue tomorrow. We'll continue every day.